What's going on, yo? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our NBA season preview series. This is the series where I'm breaking down every single NBA team before the start of the regular season. We're going to cover everything in this video. We're going to cover their offseason, what their current roster looks like, a depth chart, a rotation, what kind of assets do they have, what's their salary cap standing, what are some potential moves that they can make, everything that you need to be ready for the start of the season. This video, we got the San Antonio Spurs, so make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. So we're back here on the NBA season preview spreadsheet. As you can see, there's a lot of different things to cover in this video, so I don't want to waste too much time and start getting into things. If I sound a little weird, I am incredibly sick right now, and I am like sweating, but I told you guys 5 videos a week, so we're gonna make it happen, man. That's just how things go sometimes. But yeah, we got the San Antonio Spurs. Oh, one other quick note. If you guys want access to the spreadsheet, I build these spreadsheets to kind of help me like articulate the story and everything that I'm trying to tell and visualize everything. If you want it, just comment down below saying I would like access to the spreadsheet. I will then give you a link to join my Discord. Once you're on the Discord, just shoot me a DM saying, hey, I was one of the guys that wanted the spreadsheet. I'll give you the spreadsheet. That easy, no strings attached. I've given it to tons of people so far, and it seems like people are liking it, and you can discuss it there on Discord with the rest of us. The San Antonio Spurs. If you're a Spurs fan, just kind of like politely screw off. You guys are so lucky. Just had years and years of success and like stability and like competent players to root for and coaches, and then it finally went away. And it's not like anybody was ever rooting against the Spurs. I think we all respected like how well this franchise ran itself. And you know, a couple down years or whatever, and then you know what, you win the lottery and get one of the best players of the last like 30-40 years, maybe ever. One of the best prospects ever is probably the best way to do it in Victor Wembanyama. So now you've got that to look forward to for hopefully the next like 20 plus years or something like that. But no, seriously, this franchise does a lot of things just very well all the time. They're patient, they build things the right way, and you know what, sometimes you get rewarded for stuff like that. During Victor's first season, I don't want to talk and make this seem like it's just like Victor's team so much, but we all know why the hype is so big around this team, right? Do we think that they're going to win a finals next year? Spoiler alert, no. You can tell by the franchise status here. These are the different statuses that you can have. I've got them in growing right now because I think they have a lot of the pieces that they're kind of looking for already maybe in place. Like there's probably 1 or 2 more players they could add to this team where it would start to get interesting. But from where we're at right now, this team's got a lot going for it. You've got your franchise player and everything. Let's start trying to grow them, right? But anyway, in Victor's first season, 22-60, which like, yeah, you expected that. There's a reason they got the first overall pick, right? They weren't a very good team. You add Victor and you're like, oh, well, the team still didn't win that much anyway. Well, when Victor was on the court, they were a winning basketball team. That's how crazy it is. And they didn't play him an excessive amount of minutes, which is probably pretty responsible. But whenever he was out there, they were a good basketball team. Like there was, I can't remember the exact statistic. If you know, put it in the comments. There was something like they were a top 3 NBA defense when he was on the floor. And then as soon as he would come off, they were like the worst defense in the NBA, something just stupid like that. So the Spurs are in a good place just because they have Wemby. But there's a lot of other interesting players on this team that we'll talk about. But before we even do that, let's talk about a couple goals this year so you can keep these in mind as we're going throughout this video. A couple goals. Develop Victor, right? Develop Victor Wembanyama. That's your guy. He's been so good already, right? He's been so amazing already. Doesn't mean there's not room to grow, right? There's still a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of things to get better at. We don't need to even necessarily talk about those a ton right now, but just keep him getting better, right? Like there's a long way to go after your rookie season. Let's learn how to play well without Victor. As I told you, the team was actually pretty good when he's on the court. When he's off the court, they were pretty rough. So how do we get to a point where we can be competitive without the demigod on the floor, right? So that's another thing. Final thing, don't rush. What do I mean by that? Don't rush this team. I know there's a lot of people in this offseason in particular, they were like, they got to start to win now so Victor doesn't do this. And the Spurs don't do that. The Spurs do not work that way. They've never really worked that way. There's a reason that they made some of the signings and moves that they did this offseason. They're very much like, we're going to build this up the right way. We're going to grow internally. This is the pace that we go at. There's a process to this. If you take your time and develop people your way, it's going to work out better for you, right? And that's what they're doing right now. And I just want to make sure it stays that way, right? Hopefully they don't just rush and some big name becomes available and they're like, we have to do everything we can to get that. And, you know, there's situations where that is and isn't a good thing to do. But I think overall, you've got a very interesting core of players. Just slowly let them build. Let them get better on their own. Learn how to win. Things like that. let's just not rush. But anyway, let's talk about their offseason because they had a really positive offseason. Taking a look at the Spurs offseason here, we've got it broken up into a couple different categories. Players that they drafted, they had 3 draft picks in this one. They had player departures. These are players that were on the roster last year that are no longer on the roster, and then players brought in, players that weren't on the roster last year that are now on the roster, right? So we start off with the draft. They had 3 draft picks. This wasn't a great draft, right? I think we all kind of know that. There's going to be people that come out of it at the end of the day, and I do think they got one of the better players in the draft. But when you got into some of these second-round picks, it's no surprise that they're probably not going to be on the roster immediately. Let's start off with Stephon Castle, who I've been a proponent of saying if this guy had any semblance of a jump shot, he would have been in the clear number 1 pick because this guy can do so many things so well already. He's got a good handle on the ball. He's a very good defender. He's a great athlete. He's a good passer. He's a very smart basketball player. Like, UConn just builds them the right way. They're kind of like a Spurs of college basketball. They've got their way of doing things. They like to develop internally. They're very much culture-oriented, right? Their players just always tend to come out a little bit smarter and more ready to go. So drafting Stephon Castle, even though they didn't even necessarily have a positional need for it, made a lot of sense. They're like, well, our guy isn't in this draft anyway, so let's just get a guy that we know is going to fit Spurs culture very well, and we can try to develop him because he does have a lot of upside. Then we get into Juan Nunez, who it sounds like he's just going to be playing overseas next year, and that's totally fine. Younger point guard that just give him more and more time to develop over there. They don't need him on the roster right now. It's totally fine. Harrison Ingram, I'm going to guess, is he on a 2-way deal? That's what I'm thinking is going to happen. Defensive wing out of North Carolina. I think he's an interesting enough guy to have on a two-way deal, so maybe he develops into something eventually where he can be some sort of role player for you. So pretty simple draft in that mind. I do love the Stephon Castle pickup for them. They made it pretty clear that this was the guy that they wanted, and they went out and got him, which is awesome. Let's talk about player departures. Nothing of like huge substance here, which that's not even a knock necessarily on these guys. It's just you're not losing anybody that was super critical to this team last year. And I mean, let's be honest, they won 22 games, so like there was only so many people that were that critical, right? But they lost Dominic Barlow, who was a guy that they added to the roster like halfway through the season, like gave him a full-time contract or something like that. I actually think he's kind of an interesting big man. I'm not saying he's like all that phenomenal right now, but just the coach in me is like, I could see how I could develop this guy into something kind of interesting. So take that as you will. Where is he now? I can't even remember. Is he in Portland? I guess he's in Atlanta now. I have no idea how that happened. Was that part of a trade? I don't even remember. Then we got Devontae Graham, who was he was supposed to be like a backup point guard for them last year, but there was just times where he just really couldn't find it on the court. Devontae Graham's such an interesting player because there was that year in Charlotte where he was like gonna win like most improved player. I don't even remember if he did win it, where he was scoring like 20 points a game or whatever, and we were like, oh wow, look at this like dynamic like scoring guard or whatever. Goes over to New Orleans, just completely falls back to the player that he was. It's really interesting, like how did he capture lightning in a bottle before there? And I want to be careful with how I say that, right? Because he was obviously able to do basketball just at a high level at one point in the NBA. So how do we get him back to that? That I don't know. I know he's on a different team now. Maybe he's on Portland or something like that. But nonetheless, he wasn't a big factor for them last year. So he's gone. Is what it is, right? Then you have Cedi Osman, I'm surprised he's not on a team yet because he's still like a solid three-point shooter. He can still put the ball on the floor a little bit. He's a solid NBA veteran. He's played around a lot of great players before. So I wouldn't be surprised to see like some sort of like contending team add him at some point because he does have a decent amount of size and he can space the floor. So I'm not saying you're going to get a ton else out of him, but nonetheless, he's gone now, and that was more of a veteran leader on the team. So it kind of stinks to lose him in that sense, but you added 2 of the better vets that you could find in the NBA, if not one of the best vets in this next guy, Chris Paul. We've seen Chris Paul go to a lot of teams and just instantly make them so much better. Think about the young Oklahoma City Thunder team that he joined, where he was starting to elevate them so much internally, and now look at how good they are, right? I'm not saying Chris Paul's the reason that they all got so good, but it's a good starting point. That's why veterans are so important to these teams. You need guys that can be on-court coaches that can help steer the younger guys. Like, I'm just telling you, I've been a part of a lot of like different teams, Division 1, Division 2, like NBA, G League, things like that. You need guys like this on your team. It's such a key part in developing, especially young teams. So having a guy like this on a young and talented team like the Spurs, this is amazing. They needed a new point guard as well. Is Chris Paul going to be a 20-point-a-game guy for them? No. Is he maybe going to even play more than 30 minutes? I doubt it just because of his age. I mean, maybe. It's hard to say. They've got other decent options on the team to play point guard, but Chris Paul is going to give them at least a little bit of floor spacing. He's going to be a general for them. He's going to be their leader, and he's going to just, I can't even imagine what he's going to be able to do for Victor Wembanyama. Like, I hope all these young guys are just ready to be a sponge with this guy. And then they went and got Harrison Barnes. This was a part of the DeMar DeRozan deal from Chicago to the Sacramento. It was a three-way trade. They picked up Harrison Barnes in it, which is just awesome. Like, they needed a wing with some size on this team. Like, Harrison Barnes, nice basketball player, all said and done. He's regressed a little bit in the last couple years. I will say this guy, whenever he's in a contract year, always finds a way to go get himself like another $18 million the next season. But nonetheless, this is another really good veteran to have. He's a starter caliber player that you can throw out there, at least on a team like this, right? Should give you at least some solid defense, should be able to space the floor a little bit, and again, just be a leader on the team. You needed more competent basketball players on this team, so adding Harrison Barnes to the mix is just, it's a chef's kiss move. It's like, okay, you got Chris Paul, you got Harrison Barnes, you drafted a good rookie in Stephon Castle. This is a phenomenal offseason. Like, it's not the most extensive list ever. And like I said, are they going to win the finals? Probably not. But this is about as perfect of an offseason as you can have. So let's talk about the rest of the roster. You guys probably recognize this from the Ideal Offseason series. This is, I think, is probably my favorite tab on the entire document that I have here. I feel like I should start the videos out with showing this more, because I've looked at my retention graphs always, and I always lose like 50% of people within like the first like 15 seconds of the video or something stupid like that. So considering the first thing I show is my face, maybe that should show me something else. But anyway, we don't need to talk about those kind of analytics or anything like that. So there's a couple things we're going to look at here. We're going to look at like roster and salary breakdowns. We're going to take a look at depth chart, actual like cap space, and then draft picks and draft situations. So let's actually start off with draft picks and stuff like that. I think that's a good place to start. So this team has a plethora of draft picks in the treasure chest right now, which is awesome. It's awesome. I couldn't even list them all here. That's why I listed this here. I'm like, I only got to the 28 second round picks. I don't think I even finished them here, but this team has a lot of draft picks, which is a good thing overall. It should be important to know that we've seen in the past couple seasons, like with a lot of teams like collecting all the draft picks, think OKC or like Utah or Houston at one point, right? Like all those teams that had all those picks, eventually it does actually become a negative asset, because eventually you can't actually realistically use all the picks, so they kind of become a nothing to you. So, you know, how do we leverage these picks into something? Because like in 2026, do you really need 5 second round picks? No, you don't. So you use these when like opportune like role players or something come by to go and make a move. But like next year's draft is loaded, and you've got at least 2 first round picks. Like, you're probably not going to be an elite team, so that's a good pick in itself. The Hawks, probably not an elite team either. So you should have potentially 2 lottery picks in a loaded draft next year. Then you've got 2 other picks in the Hornets and Bulls, who you're probably not getting these picks because the Bulls and Hornets are probably not going to be very good, but it's interesting nonetheless. But yeah, no, this team is in excellent standing right now. So now that you have all these picks, right, and you're starting to grow and you're starting to build this team, how do you like use these in a very opportune way to start getting the players that you need when they become available? That's the most important thing, I think. Let's move on to the salary cap. If you guys want a deeper explanation of this, go watch one of the first video or 2 in this series of the Celtics and Grizzlies videos. I talk about these different cap levels a lot more in depth here, but the short spiel is that there's 4 different lines that you have to be aware of with NBA salary caps. There's the cap space line, the luxury tax line, the first apron, and the second apron. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about the aprons and stuff because it's pretty new and it's a big conversation nowadays, and they're very confusing. But in essence, teams are very afraid of these first 2 aprons because these are the NBA's attempt to make sure that star players aren't just being traded all the time now. Basically, if you want to have a good basketball team and you want to pay your guys a certain amount, we're going to make it incredibly difficult for you to exist and to like trade those players away. We're going to make it so that the only way you can go once you get all these dudes is down. Like, that's the only way that you're going to be able to make things happen. We're making it really hard to build these super teams and things like that. I'm personally a fan of the aprons. I think they make the game a lot more interesting and it's more of a puzzle. And if it's going to keep players where they're at for longer. That's just what I like. That's the kind of basketball that I grew up with. So I don't know. I'm interested in that sense. But the Spurs are in very good financial standing right now, and that's because they have a lot of young players, right? And eventually they're going to need to give extensions to these guys and everything. I can't even imagine the amount of money Victor Wembanyama is going to make one day, but we're a long ways away from that. Currently, they are over the cap, which means they can only sign guys for a minimum. Their roster's full anyway, so that doesn't really matter. They haven't hit luxury tax yet, so that's good. They're going to be a cheap team, and they're far and far away. Like, no way they're going to hit these this season, so you don't have to worry about the aprons. You can make whatever trades you need to make this year. It's going to be nice and simple. Your team's not restricted in any sense. You can play in the buyout market if you want to. You can make whatever deals. You can package players. They're in very good financial standing, so shout out the Spurs for this one. Let's talk about like the rest of the roster now. The most expensive player in their team is Devin Vassell, a young player that I'm personally very interested in. Devin Vassell has his flaws. I mean, he's a young player, and every player has their flaws, right? But I'm very curious about him nonetheless. Devin Vassell's a guy that's gotten himself up to like 20-ish points a game in a season, which is awesome. He's very aggressive. He knows how to get himself to the hoop. He loves his mid-range pull-up game. There's a lot of things to develop still. Like, we could see a tighter handle out of him and maybe a better three-point shot, but nonetheless, Devin Vassell's proven himself to be a pretty decent NBA scorer. The one thing that I wanted to pull up here is Devin Vassell's actual shot chart. So this is field goal percentage, and it's compared to like league averages and stuff. So you're going to see he's basically willing to take a jump shot from anywhere on the court. And there's pros and cons to that, right? One of the cons that you see, he's just not that good from like certain areas. Certain areas he's great from, but we kind of want to compress this to some extent. Like an analytically optimal shot chart, right, is 3-point and then just something right here, right? Like, that's what a good NBA player, efficient NBA player does. You have to be pretty efficient to make these shots actually worth it, but I'm not going to be one of those guys that says like don't take these shots necessarily, because I just don't want a player to have to think about that much. But it'd be nice if we could tighten this up and clean this up a little bit, because I feel like a lot of the times Devin Vassell just kind of has to go out there and make something happen, because like it's a very young team and they're a little bit disorganized at times and they're trying new things, and you know that's going to change as this team gets older and more mature. But we'd obviously like to see like a higher percentage from shots out here and over here. This is a guy that still shot like 37% on like 6 to 7 threes a game, so that's awesome. Like, he's getting up the shots, and that's awesome. But it'd be great if we could see like a little bit more efficient play and just kind of starting to tighten it up. Next up, we have Keldon Johnson, another one of the younger guys on the team, making a decent amount of money at $19 million, and he's probably going to be coming off the bench now. Keldon Johnson's such an interesting case because he's a pretty dynamic scorer. He's a little bit undersized for a wing position. He comes in at around my height of about like 6'5", which is probably like a minimum that you'd really want for a player at that position, just because, like, look, there's just some liabilities that you have as soon as you start to decrease the height that much. You can have as much skill as you want, but at some point there just are some deficiencies. But Keldon Johnson has shown us that he can be a high-level NBA scorer. We've seen seasons where he gets above 20 points a game. We've seen seasons where he gets to like 18 points on great efficiency. And so you're like, okay, like why didn't we really see that last year? My theory is this is a young guy that he's trying to learn how to play with Victor Wembanyama when he's in like situations where he's still trying to figure out his game and stuff. And I'm not saying he had like a bad season last year, but it certainly wasn't as efficient and it wasn't as tight. And there was certainly a lot of points where I've seen Spurs fans be like, look, he's just like turning the ball over too much. Like, he's just kind of out there playing by himself. And there were certainly times I just felt like this team in general was just kind of being like, okay, we're not giving the ball to Victor. We got to get ours right now. And that's kind of just a bad strategy. I feel like if you want to be on this team long term, you should try to be Victor's best friend. Like, okay, how do I really do this? And that's what Trey Jones did, and that's why he's going to get to stick around. But nonetheless, Keldon Johnson has shown he has a lot of skill. So how do we utilize that in more of a bench role, or how can we get him back to a starter level player? Hard to say because there's a lot of other players at his position, but there's a lot of skill nonetheless. Already talked about Harrison Barnes and the value that he can bring to the team. Now let's talk about Zach Collins, who has 2 years and about $17 million on each of those years left. Zach Collins is an interesting player. I was not big on Zach Collins coming in. I just didn't really see it. I was kind of like, okay, I don't know what he really excels at as a big man. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to build him into, and so I got kind of confused by that. But I'll say, the beginning of last season, Zach Collins was playing very good basketball. Like, he was like really like playing pretty well. Remember, they started him and had Victor at the 4, and I was like, okay, like Zach Collins kind of figuring this stuff out. And then it kind of fell back off a cliff. And so I want to make sure I stay consistent by saying, like, look, we've seen him be able to be productive. It's just I don't know. I personally struggled to see it being a long-term thing. The team certainly got a lot better when they just moved Victor Wembanyama to the center. And I mean, there was a couple things last year, the Jeremy Sohan point guard experiment that, look, they were experimenting with things. You've got such a unique player like Wembanyama on the team. You're just going to try different things to see what's even possible. Because why not, right? Like, let's see what kind of stuff we can actually do. So is Zach Collins a trade piece? Hard to say. I don't know who's actually like taking him on necessarily, unless a team gets desperate and they feel like they have to trade somebody and they just don't really care what they're taking back because they just want draft picks with it. Maybe the Bulls could help them out with that in some capacity because they could use maybe another big man. Ooh, we might try to make that happen later in the video. Stay tuned. I know we haven't talked specifically about Wemby yet. By the way, he's got a team option at the end of the year. They're for sure going to pick that up. Wemby's amazing. Like, you can say whatever you want. I've seen certain people be like, well, his offensive game wasn't like that crazy or whatever. Like, you know, he does have, okay, just quiet. Like, if that's your perspective, like, just don't be negative about things. Like, and I know people aren't trying to be negative with things. Like, dude's phenomenal. Just relax, all right? So we talked about him and Chris Paul. Stephon Castle, we talked about him a little bit and the ways that he's going to look to grow in his first season. Awesome. Trey Jones. I was pretty comfortable with Trey Jones being the starting point guard going into this year's San Antonio Spurs season. He's going to come in at the backup point guard right now, but the main reason why people don't necessarily they don't feel great about a Trey Jones starting point guard is because of his maybe lack of shooting, but he does so many other things well. He's a good defender. Obviously, he's a good passer. Both the Jones brothers are very efficient in that way, and most importantly, he found ways to get Wemby involved with and without the basketball. Like, he's one of the guys, one of probably the only guys that was like, okay, I'm looking for Wemby right away down the court, right? Like I'm going to get this guy involved. I want to be involved with him. So he's giving him the ball, and then he'll do things where he's immediately cutting afterwards. He's not watching, right? And you'd see Wemby hit him with a great pass, and he gets layups off of it, right? Like, he was the one guy on the team that really understood how to play with him last year. So I really like Trey Jones. I love what he brought to the team. I think he's a phenomenal backup point guard. I can't imagine what he's going to learn from Chris Paul. So I'm just really excited about his future. Jeremy Sohan. We talked about the Jeremy Sohan point guard experiment very, very briefly. He's got a team option as well. Pop had this idea that, like, this guy might be able to play point guard for us because they had quite a deficiency at point guard. I think all of us knew they probably should have just played Trey Jones. It didn't really work with Sohan, just the decision-making wasn't quite there, and having him be the primary ball handler with kind of a weird rotation of Zach Collins and Wemby and, like, whatever else you were throwing out there, it just didn't work. So I think Sohan's got a lot of interesting skills, like maybe his free throw form isn't one of them, and he shoots it with one hand or whatever, but he is hitting, like, a decent amount of his threes at this point, and he is a pretty smart basketball player. He's a good athlete. He's a good defender. So I feel pretty good about Sohan developmentally next to Wemby. I don't know if it's the perfect fit, but nonetheless, I think there's a ton of skill to try to develop nonetheless with this guy. I wanted to take a look at Sohan's shot chart really quick just because I was curious like how much he was operating in the mid-range. And like, obviously, like I said, the three-point shot's decent enough. Like, he's hitting just over like 30% of them, so it's not like horrible. It's not great, but nonetheless, like, he's taking a decent amount of them and he's hitting an okay amount of them. Like, there's a lot of room to improve still, but nonetheless, taking the right shots, right? Like, if we can get him some more like corner three attempts where he's converting those, that'd obviously be good. Not the most efficient overall basketball player right now, and that's probably just due to the fact that he's taking different shots throughout the year and stuff. I'm glad that we're starting to get more around this space, but nonetheless, like I said, there's a lot of skill here. You can tell, and he's a smart player. Just gotta start to refine some things. It was his second season, right? We got a long way to go. Another guy with a team option, Malachi Branham, basically just a mid-range killer, nice athletic kind of two-guard/wing off the bench. Curious to see, giving him more minutes and stuff like that, where can he take his game? I love the energy that he plays with, so I don't know like how much skill level we can actually develop out of him still, but nonetheless, I like his energy, and he's going to have a chance to still get some minutes this year. We have Julian Champagnie, who at the very least provides you a guy that is looking to get some open three-point looks. I don't remember what his actual percentage was last year. Okay, we kept it about 36-37 on some limited attempts. I mean, he was only getting just under 20 minutes a game, so that's totally fine. But yeah, nonetheless, you've got a guy that's at least respectable from three. You need guys like that. Talking about Blake Wesley here, another guy with a team option here. Kind of just a slightly worse version of Branham, where he hasn't quite figured out what like his main scoring ability is yet. I see a lot of times where he looks really good in transition and stuff like that, but I mean, that's a lot of young guys when they get in the league because that's just the style of basketball they've been playing up to this point. So a lot of development to go there still, but nonetheless, interesting young player to have on the team. The last three guys here: Malachi Flynn, a guy that scored 50 points at one point last season. He's going to be a reserve guard for them. I think he's a nice scoring reserve guard, a lot of aggressive play. Totally like the addition. They brought back Mamu, who's just a nice bulky center for them to have. Maybe not the most skilled basketball player in the world. There's some times where I saw him take some crazy layup attempts last season, but nonetheless, they needed a bulkier center option. Brought him back. Why not? And then they have Sissoko here, who is he French? I believe he's French as well. So you know what? It's just great to have a guy like that on the team. But he's going to be another young forward for them to try to develop. We saw stints of him where he would hit a couple threes in a row or something like that, or he'd get out in transition and run. Very, very raw. He's going to be towards the end of the rotation this year again. But nonetheless, a guy that's not taking up much in terms of salary cap space, a French friend for Wemby. I should really confirm if he's French, but nonetheless, an interesting player. Oh, thank God he's French. I thought I was going to have myself a moment right there, but yeah, no, I like Sissoko. I like the hopes of Sissoko. All right, so that's the roster itself. Let's talk about depth chart in general now. Looking at like the point guard position, honestly, you feel pretty good about this for a team that's like. We should clarify, this isn't going to be like a super competitive team. We just hope that they're competitive, right? Because last year they weren't always competitive. They had a lot of great games last year, especially towards like the end of the season. They really put some good wins together, and they were kind of starting to figure it out. But in terms of just the rotation, Chris Paul, Trey Jones, Flynn as a reserve. Can't really complain about that. That's pretty solid for a growing team. The shooting guard position, a lot going on here. A lot of youth, a lot of guys trying to figure themselves out. Devin Vassell, Stephon Castle, Branham, and Champagnie. Yep, just a lot going on there. A lot of youth. Obviously, Vassell is going to be the main option here. We want Castle on the floor as much as possible, but overall, just a lot of youth and a lot of upside here. At the forward spots, you got Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson. They're going to get a lot of minutes, obviously. They're going to have some big roles on this team. Blake Wesley, not as much. You got Sohan here, who's kind of just going to mostly play the power forward, I would presume. And then you got Sissoko kind of waiting here in the wings. So maybe you could look to add more of a stretch wing option. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's points during the season where they have a Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes playing this position with like a Wemby or something like that. So that could be something you go to. In terms of like the center position, obviously you got Wemby and that's awesome. You probably don't feel great about the reserve bigs that you have here. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you did have more of like a true traditional backup center that kind of had a defined role to play, more of like a shot blocker or something like that, or just like a strong rebounder, because I could see that being an area of weakness for this team is their rebounding. So maybe you could go try to find like some sort of center in that marks with it. But all right, now that we've talked about that, let's go on to the rotation. As always, I put a question mark around it because I just don't know at the end of the day. This is just more of an activity to say like, hey, what's our goal, right? Like, where do we kind of want to keep these guys in terms of minutes so that we can feel good about like making sure guys don't get overworked too much, right? There's going to be games where they have to play more and some where they don't, but nonetheless, this is kind of what I would kind of view the situation as of right now. So you got Chris Paul getting his like under 30 minutes a game right now. There's only so much that he can do at this age right now, but obviously still going to be a starter for them, still going to play a good amount of minutes. Oh, I just sneezed a whole bunch. Don't worry about it. Devin Vassell, probably getting the most minutes on this team. We hope that he's going to be probably the leading scorer this season. Like, it could very well be Wemby, but I would like to try to get it to a point where Devin Vassell's like really being the primary scorer on this team. I just think that that's going to be a better long-term fit for his career. And I think Wemby's going to be able to contribute in a lot of other ways. So I'd like to try to get Devin Vassell up to a point where he's getting like 22 to 23 points a game on a consistent basis. Harrison Barnes, playing kind of just under 30 minutes as well, just because we do have some other wings that we can get out there that are younger and they want some time, but we want these vets in particular on the court with some of these young guys as much as possible, just so that they're playing a higher level of basketball. So that's kind of the benefit of them being the better young players. Sohan, probably getting about 30 minutes a game, especially because there's not a lot of other guys that can play this position for us. So that's kind of where I'm thinking for him. And Wemby, let's see if we can't get him up to around like 32, 33 minutes a game, because where was he at last year? Yeah, last year he was playing under 30 minutes a game, and he got you 21.4 points and 3.6 blocks and 10 rebounds. That's so nuts. That is so nuts. So let's try and get Wemby up to like 32 minutes a game, something like that. See how the conditioning's doing. He was playing most of the offseason. See where we can get. Keldon Johnson kind of being another starter level player for us, getting the above 25-ish minutes a game. Super six man for us. Awesome. Trey Jones, we want to keep developing him. We want him on the court as much as possible because the him and Wemby combo did look so good. So getting him about 24 a game. 16 minutes for Zach Collins. Basically, anytime Wemby's not in the game, Zach Collins is in the game. That's how I'm treating it. Stephon Castle also getting about 16 a game. He's the youngest guy in the team. He could very well work his way up somewhere higher in the rotation, but that's where I'm starting him out as. And then Branham, who's just kind of filling in to kind of be a spark plug to throw in when needed, just be a little Energizer Bunny type guy. And then we've got the rest of the guys kind of just filling in the rest of the rotation. So let's take a quick second to take a look at some rotational data to see like what kind of guys do we need to be pairing in some of these rotational combinations. So here is all the Spurs rotational data. As you can see, there's a lot of negative rotations here, and honestly, like there's just a lot of like spaced out rotational data, which is interesting because they tried a bunch of different things last year. Like we said, why wouldn't you? One of the worst rotations that we saw that at least had significant minutes was this idea of, yeah, this was part of the Sohan like point guard experiment, right? Where they were like, okay, Sohan, Vassell, Branham, Keldon Johnson, Vassell, Wembanyama, just didn't really work that well for them all said and done. Are there any combinations of that kind of same rotation where they didn't have Wemby on the court? I'd be kind of curious. I'm not really seeing that, but a lot of these Sohan point guard rotations were some of the worst ones that they had last year, so not really surprised to see that as the case. So let's take a look at this one. Why was this rotation that they played a lot actually a positive? So this is when they threw Trey Jones into the mix with Vassell. They had Champagnie playing the four. They were bringing Keldon Johnson off the bench at that point. Then they had Sohan and Wembanyama. So that was a winning basketball team, funny enough. And this isn't a great rotation, but that's the power of Wembanyama. You'll notice that all the positive rotations include Victor Wembanyama. Like some of the worst ones are obviously included in this as well, but it just wasn't a great basketball team to start with. But at the very least, every single positive rotation of theirs included Wemby in some capacity. This one was a plus 20 and it had some decent minutes behind it. So this was Trey Jones with Keldon Johnson. So not Champagnie, Sohan, Vassell, Wemby. So that original rotation is pretty good. The best one that they had, only 33 minutes, included Champagnie with Keldon Johnson. So without Sohan, kind of interesting, maybe a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more ball movement around Wemby, but nonetheless, you had some good rotations around here. Oh, they actually have one with Mamu out there, but regardless, you see Trey Jones is a part of a lot of these as well, right? You actually don't see it in this one. Oh, this is a Sohan point guard one. It was only 33 minutes, but hey, it worked in one rotation. I'm curious what like three-man rotations were the most positive for them. Okay, yeah, this isn't a surprise at all. So Trey Jones, Vassell, Wemby. No surprise at all there. Trey Jones, Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, Wemby, Trey Jones, Wemby, Sohan. Yep. Nope, that all kind of checks out. It's usually like at least two of the three of Trey Jones, Vassell, and Wembanyama, right? So those are the kind of guys that we have to keep on the court with this team. Obviously, we hope Chris Paul is going to be able to replicate a lot of the things that Trey Jones was able to do. Trey's probably going to bring you a better level of like defense and like ability to attack the rim at this point in his career, but nonetheless, like, is Harrison Barnes going to be a guy that can help be like positive in that sense whenever we can't really get something out of Keldon Johnson? We hope that that's going to be a beneficial thing for them. Where is Stephon Castle going to fit into something like this? Because we saw some of these better rotations like usually have some form of shooters on the court. So if you have a Trey Jones out there who's not a great shooter and a Stephon Castle, is that really a good thing to combine at some points, or do we have to stagger these guys a little bit more? Those are the things that I'd be thinking about as a coach, and we're just going to have to see when they get into the regular season how it unfolds. But let's get into the predictions themselves now. Oh, you know what? Actually, wait. There's one thing I've forgotten to do. You know what? I don't script these things or anything. Like, I just kind of follow the flow of these. I didn't do, like, some sort of mock trade or deal or anything like that. So let's actually explore a Zach Collins deal in some capacity, because I think that this is a move that Spurs fans would probably enjoy if they could make that happen. So let me see if I can't make something happen for you guys on our good friend Fanspo. So one thing that we talked about, and I want to go and get the teams, is we talked about using the Chicago Bulls, because the Bulls should be in a spot where they're selling players for picks, right? Like they're trying to tear their team down. I don't know what the Spurs are going to get back to necessarily make that worth their while. Like, is there another, like, because the Bulls have, like, so many point guards and everything, and they don't necessarily want that, unless it's, like, a Torrey Craig or something like that. Because the Bulls could honestly use, like, another big man, especially if they move on from Vucevic at some point. So let's even see if this is possible. So let's just do, like, a Zach Collins. We're going to throw in some picks or something like that because we're making you guys take on the money. Let's just assume, because the Bulls don't have a 2025. Okay, they do have a 2025 second. They could use some 2026 seconds because the Bulls trade all their picks for some damn reason. So you can move that one to the Bulls. You can move this one to the Bulls. Why not? I can't imagine we can just do like a Torrey Craig or something like that, right? Like, there's no way that that trade actually makes sense. Like, it's going to get vetoed. Yep, the Bulls would be crossing the tax apron while hard capped. Yep, okay, so we have to remove another like $6-ish million to make that happen. What if we got a third team involved with the Hawks somehow? Because, like, the Hawks don't need Larry Nance. They just do not need Larry Nance. So what if Larry Nance was on his way to the Spurs, and then the Bulls got rid of another, like, $6-ish million? Javon Carter becomes the obvious option. They don't have another point guard option on this team, do they? Kobe Buffkin does not count. No, they don't. So this could be an opportunity for them to get rid of some redundancies on their team and get a more balanced roster while saving a bit of money as well. So we move him over to the Hawks. The Bulls are the only team that's like getting worse per se. The Hawks are saving a little bit of money this year. They do get Javon Carter for another year. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. Javon Carter kind of complements some of the things Trae Young isn't that great at. The Spurs would get a better backup center and a guy that can play more of a defensive role. They also get a Torrey Craig because they were a little bit weak at that position before. They're going to have too many players on the team though. So is there a way that we can move like someone else on this team, or are we just like releasing somebody? Kind of, what are we doing here? I don't know. It doesn't matter right now. They can make some other deals like after that to kind of make all that make sense. But nonetheless, this is kind of an interesting deal. The Bulls pick up some other assets for like a Torrey Craig and a Javon Carter that, look, they just didn't really need any of these guys. They take on the salary of Zach Collins. Maybe there's another second round pick in there or something else, right? We could probably make that argument. But nonetheless, I think this would actually be a really interesting deal for the Spurs. Get two guys that could actually help them out a little bit more. The Hawks get a player that they could use. You guys let me know in the comments, though. Maybe you guys have some different trade ideas. I'd love to read them. All right, now let's get into the standings prediction. I'm sure you guys are actually kind of curious as to where I ranked the Spurs in this one. So up to this point, let's do a little review because we're on the 10th video of this now. So do I really need to review the East in this one? I guess we can do it real quick. So we got the Celtics and Knicks at the top, Sixers coming in the top 4 seeds as well, Bulls and Pistons. Bulls just in a bad spot, Pistons an improved spot, not good still. In the West, though, we got Dallas at number 2. We got the Grizzlies at 8, which was controversial. There's a lot of good teams in the West, okay? Just calm down. The Lakers coming in at a 9, which feels at times generous, but I don't know. And the Warriors came in at a 12. I know. Isn't that crazy? Not even like close to a play-in necessarily. So where do the Spurs fall in? Right? Like, this is an improved basketball team for sure, but I mean, they still weren't good last year. Like, they weren't going to make a play-in. So, where do we have the Spurs? Drum roll, please. Maybe I should just do a video effect for this. I don't know. The Spurs come in at a 10. Oh, boy, a 10 seed. Look, the Spurs were good when Wemby was on the court last year. It's just there were times where they had too many, like, not ready NBA type players on the court. And I say not ready because I don't want to use the term like bad or anything like that, right? Like, we're developing them, right? We're getting to that point. So I honestly think with this, like with a new sense of leadership on this team and Chris Paul, just a better depth chart, maybe they make another move like we saw, like the Larry Nance or something like that. And maybe they get to a point where they are competing to get into a play-in or something. That'd be a huge success for this team. If you could already get back to like a play-in type level, I know we don't necessarily like to be at that level because it's kind of middle of the pack and it's not quite the playoffs, but nonetheless, that would be a huge jump for this team already. So I think the Spurs can do it. I think they've got enough talent on the roster to do it, and they should have a good enough leadership pool this year. I got them as the 10 seed, but let me know what you guys think down below. Where do you guys see the Spurs fitting in terms of like the rest of the West and everything like that? Leave me a comment. I'll always tell you guys, make sure you keep the comments relatively clean. Don't be combative in there. Otherwise, I will hide you. I'm trying to keep this community clean, but I am going to go take some medicine now and lay my ass down, and I'll get ready to record another video for you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much, y'all. We'll see you later.